This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, hello, this is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. This is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks, events, happenings in the world of politics and entertainment and media and the world, and we take a look at it from a higher perspective. And from a higher perspective, what do I mean? Well, we take a look at it from what one could call a spiritual perspective. Another word for it is perhaps a metaphysical perspective. We take a look at it from the point of view of how we, at the highest level in which we exist, are creating everything that's going on around us, and in that creation of it, how we learn from it, how we go into it, how we take energy from those things that we don't want to give energy to anymore, and release ourselves from perhaps further creation of things that we don't need anymore. But we can't even find that lesson out until we actually go into these things and experience them. The idea is like a hologram, where we create these interactive programs that are exciting, where there are challenges, where there are demons to be fought and wars to be won and heroics to be employed, and all of these things. They're not real. They're illusions, but they're illusions we create to exercise ourselves, exercise our skills in some ways, to learn more about who and what we really are. So that's what it's about. And it's a good idea, I think, to take a step back from all of the button pushing things that we interact with in our daily environment, because they can be toxic if we don't deal with them in a healthful way. That's why I do consider this to be a wellness show, because I think this approach really gives you a wellness kind of approach to dealing with heavy things that are going on in the world that, they do have an effect on us. We may tune them out, or we may, not pay them much mind, but they're there in the back of our minds. And, with varying degrees of sensibility or sensitivity that we may have to these things, they matter. They matter. And certainly we have seen another drama playing out this past week that we have created. The election drama, I'll call it. And, there's much talk about, the future of our country now, because the election results revealed that now the House and the Senate have been taken over by the Republicans, and for many that is a very depressing thought. For others, it's a cause for jubilance. So this is the drama that we have created. I spoke a bit about it last week, actually, when we talked about state of separation, the perception that we are so divided as a country, and the creation of that separation, and actually the belief in that separation. And, well, we know what, if you are a follower, a spiritual seeker, and particularly if you're familiar with things like the Course in Miracles, you know what a belief in separation means. It's the false belief that we are separate from the divine mind, if you will, and separate from each other. And it's duality, but it's more than just duality. It's the sense of complete detachment from anything that is not your physical body. We'll put it that way. That's an easy way to understand it. So there's that belief in separation, and of course that tends to lend itself to more, sort of more heavy-handed examples of that, which includes what many call a divided electorate, where you've got Democrats on one side and Republicans on the other, and liberals on one side and conservatives on the other, and all of these things are played with through the media, but also through our own minds, because ultimately it's our own minds that are creating the story. So we're going to take a look at that hologram a little bit more today and see what's up with that. And we're also going to talk about some new findings regarding near-death experiences. Near-death experiences. We talked about that a few weeks ago when we talked about Dr. Vencelar's physics of near-death experiences, and she shared her 5-phase theory of that, and the science behind it. Well, there's been some breakthroughs in that arena, so we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about what happened. Pardon me. We're going to talk about what happened 25 years ago on November the 9th, which is today, that changed the world in ways we don't know about yet, and kicked off a period of time, however brief, when it seemed like the world was changing in remarkable, dramatic, and in many cases hopeful fashion. So we're going to talk about that. And if we've got time, we're going to introduce another character in our continuing series, Heroes of Consciousness, a gentleman by the name of Matthew Manning, a psychic healer who actually began to experience his powers very early on, at the age of 11, in the midst of poltergeist activity around him. But very interesting story he has. So hopefully we'll get to that today on our show. But first, so let's go back to this state of separation idea, this political idea, now that the Republicans have taken over the House and the Senate. There's a lot of speculation, as there always is after every election. Where do we go from here? Where are we going from here? And what does this all mean? There's talk that this is a repudiation of President Obama and of the Democrats and of the so-called left-leaning ways that the country's been going in. And there's also been talk that this was brought about through, nefarious devices, voter suppression, and gerrymandering of districts and all of that sort of thing. And then there's the school of thought to suggest that there just wasn't enough turnout on the Democratic side, and that the Republicans mobilized their voters out, and they just voted blindly Republican. So there's perhaps validity to all of those perspectives in one way or another. My understanding of it is that, apparently from the cycles, and just to look at a meta-analysis of these sorts of things, in recent years, as people have become disillusioned, I guess, or uninspired, if you will, by government, there are these elections every couple of years in which, there's upheavals. There's, the new Congress is taken over. Well, I guess it was 2010, and we had Democrats in both the House and the Senate, and then there was election, and the Republicans took over the House. And then before that, there were Republicans running both the House and Senate during Clinton years, I guess the second half of his first term. And then by the second half of his second term, there was a revolution, and the Democrats took back the houses. So there's this sort of, back and forth pendulum swinging mentality that's going on. I think there's an understanding intuitively among people that the problems that they're concerned about, the world that they live in and are trying to, navigate through every day, the things they want to change, the things they want to have in their lives, do not have a political answer. I think people understand that politics is not the answer to anything. Voting more or less, electing more Republicans or more Democrats or more independents isn't what changes things. It never is. What changes things is our intention, where we put our energy, where we take our energy away, and most importantly, what we believe about ourselves, what we understand about the truth and oneness. Those are the things, as we grow in consciousness, as we realize that we're writing the story at the highest level. The story isn't being written for us or about us. We're not pawns in the game, we are the game. As we start to understand that, we start to begin to understand that these characters that we create are just that. They're little puppets, they're little characters. And we learn from them. I think we understand that there aren't political solutions to what we want to have in our world. We first have to understand that we have it. And we have to change our perspective on what truth is. All of these things. It's a change in perspective, not a change in elected politicians. Politics, government, is a tool. And when you have a higher consciousness guiding that tool, it can and will be very effective. We're in flux with that right now. And as people start to understand that there's power beyond just the highest levels of leadership, and that we hold that power, not anybody else. As people start to really get that, you see these changes. So you see these changes, and it's alarming for people who believe, who have this very strong belief, we've fought and died for the right to vote. And so you should always vote, and your vote counts. That's a big belief for a lot of people. It's almost a sacred belief. And that dismays many people, that people don't vote. That people don't think that it makes a difference. And so that's alarming for some people. I don't find it alarming. I find it, as I say, a recognition. It's part of this process of we're finding out that we're the ones in control. We're creating it all. It's understanding that there aren't political solutions for these problems. That it's a consciousness problem, not a political problem. And it's the dim awareness of this is starting to break through. So I think it'll be a while of sort of chaotic back and forth as we begin to pull this together. I'll also go back to what I've mentioned and been mentioning for now a couple of years now about this astrological aspect that we have between the planet Uranus and Pluto. And this is a astrology thing, and I understand that not everybody believes in such things. I find them to be good tools and guides in helping to understand larger trends, as well as it can also work on the personal level. But what I've been saying, and what many astrologers have been saying, is these years of 2012 through 2015 have been marked by this right angle relationship between Uranus and Pluto. So in astrological terms, Uranus is the planet of revolution. It's the planet of change. It's the planet of new ideas, breakthroughs, of the unexpected, too. And Pluto is the planet of power, of obsessiveness, of control, by any means necessary sometimes. Pluto does have a very negative aspect. It can also have a very positive aspect in the fact that it is a planet of transformation. It rules the sign of Scorpio, which is the sign of death and rebirth. So as you know, when things change, something has to give way, die, while something new emerges, or different emerges. Pluto is very much the handmaiden for those things. Sadly, it can be quite disturbing if you happen to be attached to that which is being washed away or dying. And quite often, these things have to happen in quite a shake-em-up fashion. And Pluto kind of is connected to all of that sort of thing. So they've been duking it out in a way. That's what the right angle is about. So you have this need for change, symbolized by Uranus, and this resistance to it, or this almost nuclear power fighting either against it or to make changes in a different direction. So while these two are at odds with one another, you have conflict, and you have social protest, and you have change, and you have upheaval. And you can see it reflected in, I've talked about how it's reflected in Syria, in the Middle East with the Israelis and the Palestinians, in the Ukraine with Russia. We've seen it play out back and forth, and we're still in the middle of this. And I think it plays out in our country too, and I've mentioned it here, and I think election results may be part and parcel of this too. In our country, it's a social protest, and it mostly has to do with the idea, the fear, the story that the top 1% of the country, in terms of income, those who are the richest, are having an undue power over our lives, and that those of us in what they call the 99% are struggling ever more to make ends meet. It's a fight over economic social justice. As the corporations become more powerful and more, as they consolidate themselves more to give themselves more power, we begin to feel like we are more powerless. Again, this is the story. This is the illusion of powerlessness, and it's the illusion of power. But it's the story we're telling right now. And it's an important story to go in. And through it, we will learn where power really is. Through it, we will learn who and what we really are as we engage in it. But it's not going to be, I think, a bed of roses for a while. This astrological influence lasts through 2015, so 2012 through 2015. And then what will happen may be even more change. And here's what I want to suggest, and it's not to scare anybody. This isn't Fox News, what we're doing here. Sorry, I couldn't resist. But what brought it to mind was sort of an offhanded comment I guess I heard on the news when we were talking about the House majority of Republicans, that it was the biggest majority of Republicans in the House since 1929. And that struck a chord. Because what happened in 1929? Well, I'll tell you what happened. I'm sure you know. What happened in 1929 was the huge crash of the stock market, which ushered in the Great Depression and a world economic crisis. It happened on October 28th, but throughout that year there were signs. There was a mini crash in March, and things began to get shaky, and they were shaky because there was little or no government regulation, and the people in government at that time, that large Republican majority that they're talking about, were more interested in making things easy for the very wealthy, for the bankers, and so forth and so on, than they were about taking care of the practical, everyday things that need to be taken care of. So I won't go into an in-depth analysis of the Great Depression era, but suffice it to say that through that really life-altering experience, amazing changes happened. Out of that came almost everything we think of as social progress. Out of that came the building of our infrastructure that we know, public parks that we still love to go see, including Mount Rushmore and others, were either built or upgraded using people who were sadly out of work because of the Great Depression. The government put them to work. Out of this era came ideas for welfare program for the poorest, Social Security, so that old people wouldn't perish in poverty. And this led to, again, later on in the 60s, and where there was more movement in the field of things like Medicaid and Medicare. All of these things that have served us very well and created a level of prosperity came out of this difficult time. I know for my father, he was a young man at this time. He was a child at the time that the Wall Street crash happened. Um, but it influenced his generation of people's thinking about things. Our generation and the preceding generations from it, beginning with the baby boomers and on, we're very self-aware. We're more self-aware than that generation, but we're maybe a little too self-aware and a little too self-involved. This generation thought that there were things, and this is thanks to the Depression, that you did, and you didn't you weren't really, it wasn't all about you. There were things that you needed to do for the greater good. Because if we didn't do them, everybody would suffer. And they knew this because they saw physically the reality of that. They had the manifestation of that in going through the Great Depression. The Great Depression was a period where people came together to help each other, for the most part, because they needed to. There was nowhere else for them to go. So, what I'm suggesting is that after this period of 2012 through 2015, that we may experience something very similar. We are, still having economic problems, even though it seems on the surface that they look very good. There's still a lot of things going on underneath. There's a slowing of the economy in Europe, and again, I won't go into this. There are people who are smarter about this stuff, but there are a number of people, including Mr. Tom Hartman, who actually wrote a book called The Crash of 2016, and others who believe that this is coming because we didn't really address the problems in the financial sector when we had our last crash in 2008. And many consider that to be a precursor to what we're in for. So again, this is not to scare anybody, because it should be understood that as difficult as times can appear to be, there are amazing things that come out of it. Just think of all the wonderful movies and songs and ways that people created to escape the Depression. And think of the things that we learned from it. That's what it's about. So, okay, I gotta move on here because we're running short on time. So, there's been a breakthrough in science, in understanding of what near-death experiences might be. And this is an experiment that was done with rats, and what they found basically was that at the point of death, they found a tremendous surge of electrical activity in the brains of these dying rats that suggests that in humans it might give rise to a heightened state of consciousness. That means being more aware than we might usually be. And so these experiments haven't been done on humans yet, of course, so we don't know whether that translates well to people as opposed to rats. But it signifies the beginning of a change of thinking, because doctors and scientists, their belief was that at death the brain was inactive, or very slowly active. And what this is showing is that this is not the case. In fact, it becomes ultra active, and a heightened state of awareness, a heightened state of consciousness could occur. What does this heightened state of consciousness bring to us? That is the interesting question. Before, it was believed, and near-death experiences were written off as the brain shutting down. So as it lost power, you would begin to hallucinate and all of these things. But what we see now is that it's exactly the opposite. a level of consciousness that we don't normally have access to in our everyday lives. It's a fascinating thing to think about, really is. Alrighty then. We're just about out of time here. So I just wanted to mention again that, 25 years ago today, the Berlin Wall came down. And what was remarkable about that at the time, and is still remarkable, is that this wall, which divided Germany into East and West, for people such as me, who had been born during this time and hadn't known any other reality other than there being a Berlin Wall. You have to understand that nobody thought it could ever come down. Nobody thought it could ever happen. And because of the tensions of the Cold War, East Germany was aligned with the USSR, and they were communist, and West Germany was, democratic and aligned with the West, and these tensions we thought would never end. Well, this shows you that things do end. Even the most heinous of obstacles turns around. And this ushered in a time when amazing changes continued to happen. The USSR, almost overnight, went away. Now, some people see this as a good thing, and some people as a bad thing. But it was just something that no one thought would ever happen. We thought there would always be a USSR, and that they would always be enemies. And all of a sudden, they weren't our enemies anymore, and they were gone. And then, a year or two later, during this time, Nelson Mandela was let out of prison after 25 years. Nobody thought that would happen. And apartheid in South Africa vanished. It was an amazing, hopeful time that people don't talk about enough. For a brief period of time, we didn't have enemies. For a brief period of time, freedom was emerging in a way that it hadn't, and that nobody thought that it could. So if you're despairing over politics, if you're despairing over elections, remember this. Remember this. It's about consciousness. You can take any situation and go into it. Acknowledge who and what you really are and take energy from it. It changes things. You can change anything. You can change anyone when you use that approach. It's very important to understand. All right, now I've gone past my time. So I gotta get out. A week. See you next time.